Own Your Magic, presented by Tor Teen. From journeying under the stars to learning what makes you extraordinary, we're joining Tor Teen authors TJ Klune, author of The Extraordinaries, Mark Oshiro, author of Each of Us a Desert, Bethany C. Morrow, author of A Song Below Water, and Sarah Henning, author of The Princess Will Save You. And I'm the moderator, Charlie Dean Anders, the author of the upcoming Victories Greater Than Death. And we're going to discuss the power behind owning your magic. There's no limit to what might happen as everyone begins to bend the rules. And I'm just so excited to be here with these four extraordinary authors. This is just such a thrilling group of people, and I'm just so stoked for this conversation that we're going to have. And so I think we also, if we could just start off with everybody introducing yourselves, maybe we can go in alphabetical order. So I guess, Sarah, could you introduce yourself first, please?
I had to think about where I was in the spectrum. I'm Sarah Henning. I'm the author of The Princess Will Save You, which is sort of a gender-swapped damsel in distress story inspired by The Princess Bride. And my debut was Sea Witch and Sea Witch Rising, which is sort of a origin story for Hans Christian Andersen's Sea Witch. And then I have a football book that came out this year called For Like a Girl, which is just out here.
Okay, and I guess TJ, I think you're next.
Hi, I am TJ Klune, and I've got a couple of books, even though they're the same book. I am the Lambda Literary Award-winning author of over 20 novels, from contemporary to fantasy to science fiction. My last novel, The House in the Cerulean Sea, was released in March from Tor, and my upcoming YA debut is called The Extraordinaries, and it's coming out July 14th from Tor Teen. Though I've obviously written quite a few books, the through line for all of them is that all the main characters are queer. It is important to me to have positive queer representation in the world, and I want to do my part in spreading that message. And thank you for having me here.
And now, sorry, Bethany. Hi,
Bethany,
sorry. Yes,
Bethany C. Morrow. I am the author of A Song Below Water, which just recently came out from Tor Teen. My adult debut was in 2018 called Mem. It's speculative literary fiction. I also edited an anthology for the young adult market called Take the Mic, Fictional Stories of Everyday Resistance. And I just have a bunch of other stuff coming out next year, and we'll just leave it at that.
Yay. And Mark.
Wonderful. Hi, Charlie Jane. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I am Mark Oshiro. I am the author of Anger is a Gift, which has no actual magic, just emotional magic, I guess. In it, that's my debut young adult novel. And then my second young adult novel comes out this year, September 15th. It's called Each of Us a Desert. It is a magical realism, little bit of horror, little bit of a punch in the heart, because that's what I like to do. I just want to drink all of your tears. About a young girl with a magical ability that keeps her restricted to her village, who one day finds out that maybe she was lied to and she decides to leave. It's real messed up and I love it. So that's me.
Yay. So Bethany, I would love to ask you a little bit more about A Song Below Water. I read that it started out with the phrase, "My voice is my power," and I would love to hear more about how that became the basis for a story about Black sirens and the networks that protect them, and how this became a way to talk about the ways that Black women are silenced and victimized in the real world. And I'm hoping to know how that led to creating an alternate version of Portland, Oregon, where this power exists, and how introducing magic and mythical creatures allowed you to comment on real life events in a different way.
Sure. So I will start with the line, "My voice is power." So it is literally a line that I said to my sister, Jennifer, when we were on Twitter, as we always are. And we were watching this happen. I think it must have been 2017. And there was a Black woman who was being completely abused and dragged and eventually would go on to be doxxed on Twitter because she shared an opinion, which obviously we know that's not allowed for Black women. So, but in the abuse that was happening to her, everybody was basically trying to convince her that she was meaningless and that she had no influence and no one cared what she thought, which is really hard to believe when you're all dogpiling someone. And like when you've all been called from the four corners to come and do this, it's like, clearly that's not true. So I said to my sister, "My voice is power," as in I know that I have power, and I know that you know I have power, and that's why you're pissed off. And when I said that to her, the next thing that I said to her was, "That sounds like something a siren would say. And then I said, that sounds like only Black girls are sirens then. And so immediately Tavia's character, which is a Black siren, a teenage girl who is a Black siren, came, I won't say fully formed in terms of the character, but fully, that her entire predicament came at the same time, at which it, you know, is the predicament of a Black girl living in the United States. So she is part of a population that knows their influence, that can observably see their influence, can see how important they are, that is constantly gaslit pretty much 24/7 with people trying to convince them that they have none and that they are not powerful and they are not loved and they are not desired. And so part of what happened, because I knew that that's who she was, I knew she had power and I knew she wasn't supposed to use it, that she was made to be afraid of using it. And therefore I knew that there has to be some other magical identity that is honored for, I won't say their power, because it's sort of, the people on the other end of the spectrum in this book are a loco, and that's sort of my own Black American diaspora kind of interpretation of a Central African mythology of the Boloko. And in my book, because I'm just decentering European fantasy and images, period, even sort of the other end of the spectrum is still very Black. So so the Oloko are the ones who are at the top of the food chain, but they can be anyone in the world can be born in a loco. It's not restricted to any sort of ethnicity or demographic, and therefore they're the most beloved, but also they don't actually have to have any particular power. They don't actually have to, and for me, this is what contemporary fantasy and just speculative fantasy or speculative fiction allows marginalized people to do. And specifically, if you look at sort of the heritage of Black Americans who have used speculative fiction, we're not creating alternate versions of any place. We're using speculative elements to show you the reality of the places you live, like to show you what this place is actually like. So I say that speculative fiction for a Black American writer allows you to elevate the truth and alleviate the burden on the Black reader. So I can tell you some really hard things, but it gives a sort of a psychic distance to the Black reader, because I can see it, but there's something that allows me at least a little bit of peace, like a little bit of alleviation from the fact that this is something I know very well. This is a real life experience for us, and making it fantasy. Like I said, it serves different purposes for the different audiences, but for us, I do it because I feel like it lets me also infuse this story of what it's like to be a Black girl with the magic that I think is very true to life, and particularly on the West Coast, what it's like to grow up in primarily white spaces, and to basically be erased from all narratives on that coast. I remember growing up, I loved the song California Girl, I wish they all could be California girls. And it was so surprising to so many people whenever I would be singing that song, and I'm like, I'm born and raised in California, you guys. Like, are you serious? Like, I was like, run through that thought process. Tell me again why this doesn't make sense to you, that I consider myself a California girl. Like, just the nonsense, just like the mental acrobatics that have to be done to constantly remove us from our own stories. And so part of doing contemporary fantasy, of course, is giving some of that magic back, and centering, you know, writing us into the narrative, but also centering us in the makeup of the world. And in reality, the only way to make sense of America is to understand the Black American experience. That's just fact. You don't know America if you don't know what it's like to be Black American in the United States. So it's extremely important to me that this is a truth that needs to be understood, not just by Black girls who need the representation and the inclusion, but by white people who don't really know themselves or their country very well. I don't know if I answered all of your questions.
That was amazing.
Incredible.
That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
So TJ,
I was about to say, I'd hate to be the
you
person
know-
that followed that. And no, here we go. All right.
I mean, you know, I'm just mixing
TJ,
it up.
the white guy, tell us what you think.
I want to just go alphabetical the whole time. So TJ, I'm super interested in, you know, you chose to write a character with ADHD, and I'm interested in to know how, your own experience of ADHD informed your process of writing that character and why you thought it was important to represent that in the book. And I'm also I read that you got pressure from one publisher that was interested in doing the book to make it a queer coming out story,
right,
instead of a queer coming of age story. And why did you push back against that? Why is it important to tell LGBT stories, LGBTQIA+ stories that are not the ones that we've seen a million times before? And why did you think that was important to do?
right. And I'll tackle that second question first, because it's something that does stick with me. Look, I'm not going to lie and say that the coming out trope and coming out stories are not valid. They absolutely are. 100% they are. And they are a necessary point as part of YA fiction, and they are needed. But I get trapped in the idea that some people seem to think that coming out is all there is, and that there's nothing else after that. You come out and hooray, everything is fine and wonderful. Or it's like when back in 2015, when the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage, people were like, hooray, homophobia is over. Everybody can be happy now. And that's just not how it works. It's not. Look, like years ago, it was probably at least a decade now, that they came up with the slogan and the initiative of "It Gets Better." And while I saw what they were striving for with that, while I saw what they were trying to do, it always rubbed me the wrong way, because you were telling vulnerable kids that were hearing this message that it gets better in the future. It does not get better now. And that bugged me, because there are kids out there that needed to hear that it's okay to be who you are and that you are perfect just the way you are. Instead, they were hearing, hey, it might suck right now for you. It is probably going to suck for a little bit longer, but you know what? It will get better, ... And that always rubbed me the wrong way. So when we were shopping around the Extraordinaries to publishers, most of the publishers were amazing and wonderful, and they said, yes, this is what we like about the story. This is what, but we had one publisher, I don't even remember who it was, that said, this book, we want coming out. We want this to be a coming out book. We want this book to be about him finding, about the lead character discovering his sexuality and where he falls and what he wants to. And that's not what this book was about. This book was written with the idea that there are queer kids that at the age of 15, 16, 17, they know who they are. They are already out. They are already proud, because that is the next logical step of the coming out process, is that you come out and you still have to grow. That's not that's not the be all and the end all. And it did rub me the wrong way that I felt like the queer experience was being minimized into just coming out. And that was something that I was not appreciative of, at least for this book. Again, the coming out trope, coming out stories, they're all valid, they're all necessary, people read them for a reason, but that's not the entirety of the queer experience. With this book, and obviously it's fiction and it's fantasy about superheroes and a queer kid with ADHD who's obsessed over them, so much so that he writes fan fiction about them. But the thing is, with this, in this world, he's out, his friends are out and proud, and their parents love them for who they are. They don't give a crap about who their kid loves. They don't give a crap what their kid's gender is, who they want to be inside. They don't care about that, because they care about their kid being happy and being at peace with themselves. And, again, going through the fiction lens, there's no homophobia in this book, because let's face it, it's 2020. I don't want to read about homophobia. I get that enough in my everyday life. I don't need to see that in fiction. So with this book, I wanted to write a world where being queer wasn't a big deal, because it's not. It should not be. It doesn't need to get better. It should be better now. You should be happy with who you are now. And that also brings back to circle back with the ADHD aspect of it. I am neurodiverse. I have ADHD. And when I was a kid growing up, when you're 13 or 14 years old and you find out that you have ADHD, and then on top of that, you're figuring out that you're queer. So in your head, you're thinking, I'm gay and disordered. What the hell is going on? And that's just how, at least that's how it was for me. And I remember trying to find even in the last years, trying to find some kind of book that showed queer neurodiverse characters. And there's not a lot out there because ADHD, being neurodiverse, has such a stigma to it still. It is something that most people don't understand. And what they think when they hear ADHD is they think loudmouth, talkative, never shuts up, doesn't know how to think, isn't smart, anything like that. And that's just freaking ridiculous. Yeah, I talk a lot, but hell, that's just who I am as a person. I'm gregarious. It's just what I do. But I wanted to be able to write a story and tell a story about a neurodiverse person like me, because I wanted to give the queer kids out there, or anybody out there who wants to see themselves in fiction, be able to pick up this book and say, hey, this is a person that understands what it was like to be me. This is a person that knows what it's like to struggle with your thoughts that move at 1 billion miles per hour. It basically, in the book, it's described, Nick, the lead character, describes ADHD as basically his brain being the world's fastest car, but it has the brakes of a bicycle, because that's what it means to have ADHD. And a lot of people don't understand that a kid with ADHD becomes a teenager with ADHD, who becomes an adult with ADHD. And when you're a kid and you're different, you want to hide that difference because it doesn't allow you to become relatable with anybody else. At least that's what you think in your head. And I know that's how it was for me. I didn't like that part of myself because it filled me with an otherness that other people didn't have. And that made me separate, and therefore I could not relate to them. And then top that off with the fact that I was queer, I didn't know what to do. But when you start and learn to grow to accept those parts of yourself, you see that they basically become your own personal superpower. And that's just what I want to do. I want to celebrate the loudmouth, the talkative kids whose brains never shut up, because we matter, and I want to tell their story.
Cool. And Sarah, I'm fascinated to hear what draws you to riff on existing stories like The Little Mermaid in your previous book and The Princess Bride in The Princess Will Save You. And what it was about The Princess Bride that drew you to write your own version of that story. And, why is it important to take the characters who are the villains or the victims in the original version of the stories and make them the heroes at the center of the story? And, finally, just, I love the idea of a badass princess who goes off to get her man and who goes off to save the day. And I wanted to know where that character came from and how fun was it to write a badass princess? That's really what I want to know.
Super fun. So I was thinking about this question, and it's just, as an 80s kid, The Little Mermaid and The Princess Bride were super important, right, to growing up. And then as a teenager, I went and saw Clueless in the theater, right, which is a riff on Emma. And I remember reading, I was in the Jane Austen phase, and I was like, that is so cool. Yeah, that is, that's really cool. And then The Lion King came out, and it was basically Hamlet, right? I'm like, oh, I recognize that, right? This is what I've been learning about. And so it wasn't necessarily that I set out to go riff off something that I knew, but it was these are things that I'm comfortable with and I love, but I also want to explore. With The Little Mermaid and The Sea Witch, if you read the actual Hans Christian Andersen tale, you'll feel a little betrayed if you grew up on the Disney version, right? Because the Sea Witch is not the villain. She is a witch who has this little mermaid that comes in, and she is really desperate to go and get her man, right? And the Sea Witch is like, do you want to leave your family and your friends and everything you know for a boy that doesn't know your name? And the girl's like, yes. And the Sea Witch helped her anyway. And so I wanted to think about who this person was. Clearly somebody who'd been in love, who'd had their heart broken, and thought it was worth it to try, even though this girl could die in the end, right? And so that's what I was exploring with Sea Witch. And so with The Princess Bride, I loved that as a kid, right? I loved it. I love it as an adult. My kids have seen it a million times. But there's always something about the ending that made me uncomfortable. And I couldn't figure out exactly what it was until I was an adult. And then, I couldn't name it, right? But so Buttercup is so fierce throughout the entire story, right? She knows what she wants, and then she's heartbroken, and she still knows what she wants. And at the end, that person disappears. She's married Humperdinck, her life is over. And I get that we're trying to get across her desperation, But she sits there and she has a dagger and she's going to end it. And I'm like, you know, the Buttercup at the beginning of that story would have taken that dagger and gotten out of there. Like, you know, she was just so distraught that this is what her life had become. She'd become this object. So that's what I wanted to explore with the damsels idea, is that like these damsels, you know, if the villain is the hero in their own story, the damsel doesn't even have their own story, because they're out here. They're the thing at the end of the rainbow, the pot of gold at the end of the quest. And then they're going to fall in love with the hero, right? Because they're so excited to be saved. And that's stupid. And so the idea was not only just to flip it and have the girl go get her man, but also to explore the idea that the damsel doesn't have to be weak. Like my damsel, he's not weak, you know, he's not, you don't have to give women power and take away from the other people. Like that's, you know, that's not what this necessarily needs to be. And so I not only wanted to fix the things that I found problematic in The Princess Bride by kind of taking the framework I was inspired by and flipping it, but just also just explore what that means. Like if you're going after somebody because you're in love with them, there's something to be saved, they're still a person, they're still a thing, and you know, and they still have agency. And I wanted to give back agency to pretty much everybody involved, and really explore that. And then as far as Princess Amarande and her strength, I hate the term Mary Sue. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. When people call Ray a Mary Sue, it drives me bananas, because we would never do that to a man. We'd never say that they're a Mary Sue. There's no masculine like equivalent. And so I wanted to take a warrior who was taught everything. She knows how to fight. She knows how to use her strength. She's not very big, but she knows how to use technique. And she still struggles. She has never dealt with sleep deprivation. She's never been through a desert. She's never had food deprivation. She's never been so concerned about saving somebody that she loves that she doesn't even think straight. And so she faces challenges in other ways. You know, like you can still be highly trained and not know what to do with that dagger when you actually can put it into somebody. And that is still, you know, that's something that you have to learn. And so she knows what to do, but it's still difficult to actually do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Mark, I mean, I loved Anger is a Gift. That book meant so much to me, and I feel like it's just kept meaning so much to me since I read it, and I'm just so excited for Each of Us a Desert. So I love the idea of a world where stories are powerful and where power is contained in stories, and that's kind of where the magic comes from. And I've heard you talk before about Each of Us a Desert, and I'm really interested to hear more about how you created this world and this character, So, who can take people's stories inside her and then take them out into the desert and give them to her God, to the people, the God of her people. You know, did you take real life traditions and adapt them for your world, or how did you take things that you had found elsewhere and make it into a secondary world setting? And just how do you come up with a narrative where stories have this much power, and how does that theme shape the journey that your two main characters, Sho and Amelia, take in the book? I want to hear all about it. I'm so excited.
Oh my God. So I hope you're not ready for like an answer where I talk about how brilliant I am and how I thought all of this was correct, because
I want to hear about how brilliant you are.
That's not what happened at all, because I have this.
That is what happened.
It isn't, because I have this really weird ability, which is I have never written a book in the right genre the first time, ever. I am now 4 for 4 where I turn in a project and someone's like, is this really fantasy? Is this really horror? Is this really this? I think it would be better if it was this. And then the person was right every single time. So the original draft of Each of Us a Desert it wasn't secondary fantasy. It was like far future dystopia. I had planned this whole narrative out, and then when I turned it in, it both was like one of the saddest books I've ever read. It was just such a bummer that I wasn't excited about it anymore. And then it also accidentally predicted the future. And my editor was like, hey, I think everyone's going to think you're commenting on this thing, even though it's entirely accidental. Do you really want to put a book out about this? And so the idea for the magic and making it become a secondary world was never intentional. It only came about when 3 of us here all have the same editor at Tor, Miriam Weinberg. When Miriam was like, one of the things I liked about the original draft was about this girl deciding to take this very long venture across the desert. And she said, I want to keep that structure, but why? Why would someone leave? And she also said, I know you have never, ever once said, I'm going to write fantasy, but I think you have the workings of a journey, like a traditional fantasy journey. I think you should write fantasy. And I was like, over my dead body, that'll never happen. And now this is out September 15th. So that worked out well. But I came up with the idea from two places. One, it's been really interesting. I had to have a long talk with my work wife, Zoraida Cordova, because we both did something interesting with fantasy, which is, you know, each of us at Desert is very much steeped in a world and a culture that feels like the Latinx diaspora. Like it feels like it comes from that, but being adopted, not knowing where my place is in the community, and only having sort of tangential relationships with immigration, I wasn't comfortable writing sort of the book you would expect, which has been a topic in the last 24 hours in publishing about Latinx books. Well, we won't talk about that, but I only drew from one real world experience to make this. Everything is actually just made up. Like I think that was part of the fun of fantasy. And until I started writing, I didn't realize like you can just do whatever you want. Oh my God, what? You can just have this happen. But the thing that I was drawing from, and I think once I say it, it'll be very obvious to people who read the book, you know, is I was drawing from my experience growing up in the Catholic Church and confessional. And this idea that you can, you know, receive benediction, you can be saved by telling the truth to another person, and you have this act that is very holy, or the intent of it is holy. And I liked it until I started to see people I knew very well who used it as a way to exonerate themselves without actually doing the work to get better, where they would use the confessional to tell the truth and say, I did this terrible thing. And then they're given 10 Hail Marys, and then they think they're done. And they think that's the work of humanity. And so I took that idea and made it extremely literal and kind of gruesome. And I thought, what if this girl is like a human confessional, and her magical ability is someone tells her a story, she eats it, and it takes it into her body, and now she knows everything that they did, everything. She knows the truth. And then she goes out into the desert, she regurgitates the story, and she forgets it. And so how would that be misused? How would people treat a person that they know they can tell anyone what they did wrong, and it exonerates them of what they did? And so without getting too spoilery, how this sort of came up of like stories have powers, I thought, what if she takes a story, and in that story is a detail that maybe no one told her the truth about who she is. And she was never supposed to know, but now she knows. And all of a sudden she's like, wait, if I give up the story like I'm supposed to, I'll forget it and I'll never know. And I just liked the idea of that one domino falling over. I think, you know, talking about the panel topic too, I liked that I wrote a book where there is no structure to magic in any traditional way. It's why I do use the magical realism tag. I wanted to pull the fantasy narrative, so like you, Bethany, like I wanted to pull it out of this like European centric, everything has to have rules, everything has to have this very specific structure. And thinking about the books that I read, you know, in my late teens, because I didn't discover magical realism until I was like 17 or 18 years old. It was not taught. I didn't know that there was this whole vast body of literature. So I love the idea that we know that there's magic, everyone accepts it, but as she leaves her village for the first time, she finds out that there's no way to control it. There's no way to know how it manifests. And hey, it might manifest differently for different people based on what they believe. And using that to spin this metaphor that magic means something to all of us. Also, it's just I just like writing messed up stuff. There's some just real weird shit in this book. Where I remember turning it in and Miriam was like, I told you to go dark, but like, are you okay? Like, and I was like, that's what I want to hear from my editor. Like, are you okay? Do you need therapy? He's like, so it was fun. In the end of the day, it was so fun to just do whatever I wanted with the magic. I do admit that I am like, have a deeper respect from people though who do write magical systems, because that shit is hard. I have like 2 rules, and it's like can't imagine someone writing like 20 rules. I'm like, that's too many. That's too many for me.
Rule 7. There is no rule 7.
Exactly.
Rule 8. Eat pancakes. So yeah, I mean, no pancakes. You can't have pancakes. What the hell?
Pancakes got ruined by a recent book That's all I'm gonna say.
Oh
can't-
no! Why
now
does
I
everything
kind of
get
wanna
ruined?
know.
Sorry.
Why does everything get ruined? I want pancakes. Can I have toaster waffles?
Okay.
Does your magical
Yes.
sister let me have toaster waffles? Okay, good.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so the title of this panel is about owning your magic, and I'm really interested. It seems like all 4 of your books are about people claiming their power and people who have been told not to kind of control their own power, or who have been marginalized, or who've been told to just sit still and do what you're told, stepping up and becoming powerful and owning their own power. And I'd love to hear more about how that theme resonates for you and why it's so important right now to have a book about people stepping up and taking your own power. And I guess I'll just go in the same order again. So I guess, Bethany, could you start us off?
Yeah. Something that's really upsetting me about my book coming out, and I guess it's literally, there's a line in the book that says, I don't know, well, to paraphrase, it says, I don't know if I should be happy that people are listening or if I should be annoyed that it's taken them so long. And I mean, I feel that from the depth of my soul. So the thing is that I wrote this book in 2017, right? And people are calling it prophetic in a way that I'm like, you just don't listen to Black women. Like, how could it be prophetic when I wrote it 3 years ago? And if you're seeing the same things happening, then now you have to confess that this has been happening the whole time. You just didn't care. So I wasn't trying to, when I say your voice is power, I was talking specifically to Black girls. It's not a feel good, this is everybody needs this message. Some of you don't need that message. Like, some of you need to completely rewind that message and question, why do I think my voice needs to be heard? Why do I think, how am I weaponizing police and calling the police every single time my feelings get hurt? Your voice isn't power. You know it's not, because you have to go weaponize something that is literally an arm of terror in order to, like, we're having an interpersonal situation that has no reason for anybody to come in between, and you've got to go call the police. So my thing is, like, this book is for everyone in the way that literally all books have been. I have been fluent in certain things my entire life, and I have to be for my survival. This book isn't for everyone because the message is for everyone. This book is for everyone because everyone needs to get this. So the message about your voice being power is specific to Black girls. It is literally, if you hadn't figured this out, which most I want to believe will have already known this, because 6-year-old Bethany knew this. The reason you're treated the way you're treated is because you're powerful, is because it matters, is because the world is constantly trying to emulate you. While, like, I'm ghetto if I wore cornrows to school in junior high, but as soon as it's a bunch of white girls in a fashion magazine, it's like, this is groundbreaking, this is amazing. And only some of us are sitting there like, I literally just got spit on for this yesterday. Like, I literally just got expelled from school for this yesterday. So it's very much about, like, to me, it's an indictment of anybody who didn't already know this, which I have no problem saying. All of my work indicts the reader. Like, I'm not embarrassed by that. I'm sorry. Because what you take from the book or how you feel about the book tells me something about you, and I hope it tells you something about you. Something that Mark was actually just saying about decentering European ideas and Eurocentric ideas of even magic, in that they all have, there's a system and there has to be rules and all that kind of stuff. One of the biggest things that people have asked is, like, she never really tells me how the Aloco work. Like, she never really tells me. And I'm like, it's white privilege. The Aloco power is white privilege. There are no rules because it's nonsense. It's made up. It's a power that's given. It's not a power that exists. It's something that is literally assigned to this group for the purpose of underlining that this other group is unacceptable. So it's like literally white privilege. And I remember when I had to tell, my first editor was Diana Foe. I remember when I had to tell her, like, oh, okay, well, I thought it was really obvious, but the Aloco just have white privilege. They don't have any actual powers. And then it was like, oh, okay, everything makes more sense now. Like, so it was like, there's no, I'm always talking about or trying to illuminate or elevate something that is real. And so I want us to look really at mythology and like the mythology of mythology and who gets to determine what are the rules and how do I have to present it to you for this to be realistic and all of that kind of stuff. And then say, but you're not my target audience, so I'm not going to do that. This is my target audience. And we get this. We understand what's happening here. So you can either get on board or you can like show yourself to be very illiterate. I don't know. It's up to you.
I'll jump off.
TJ? Oh yeah, Mark. Actually, Mark.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yes.
No, Mark, go ahead.
Mark.
You don't want to know, TJ. You don't want to go? Like,
No,
right
see,
after-
well, I guess the
Mark.
thing I want to say real quick is that when speaking with rules and stuff like that, that bothers the crap out of me, because rules are, who are they for? If you're writing a story and you are writing these characters, break the damn rules.
Right.
Don't do what other people did before you. Write your own damn story. And that is what I wish somebody had told me. I wish that somebody had told me and given me that advice, because I always thought, especially in a space that is primarily dominated by cis white men of science fiction and fantasy, that you have to adhere to what came before. That these are what the giants before us have created, and this is what we must follow. And that is, I wish I had been told that, no, don't do that. Carve your own path, go your own direction, screw what everybody else did before you. And if some people get upset by what you're doing, good.
Right.
That's how it should be. Because if they're getting upset, that means that they're probably uncomfortable. And if they're uncomfortable, they deserve to be uncomfortable, because they were obviously getting way too settled in how they are.
There you go.
So now, Mark, please.
I
had to get that off my chest, because I was so
perfect.
fired
It's
up for her
perfect.
too.
You've set up the perfect segue, because now I'm thinking too, it's not even magic rules. It's that they're rules, but no one sits and thinks who has the power of the rules.
Right.
And there's no acknowledgement of, okay, if we're going to have this system, what is the cost into it? Who pays the price and who doesn't? And a lot of times you have these magical systems and then no one's thought about that. And well, what I mean by no one is people who historically have had so much power, they've never had to question a system when they don't have it. So like, the thing I was thinking when you asked this, Charlie Jane, was I really wanted to write a character, not just in a world where there's no definable set of logic to the magic or set of rules. But I really, part of Each of Us a Desert is a reaction to people's response to anger as a gift. And while I loved people describing Moss and Anger as a Gift as a cinnamon roll, because he is, and I wanted to write this really soft black boy, and I wanted to have characters who were nice and kind for him. It's a whole thing. I got a lot of stuff where I felt like people were infantilizing the characters. And white reviewers, white people interacting with it, who were treating them like they weren't even people. And that bothered me, because I'm like, if you're doing that, you're supposed to miss the whole point of the book anyway.
Right.
But you can't, it's this thing where you often see people put people of color put them on a pedestal. And this pedestal is respectability politics, which is if they act and behave a certain way, we like them. And the second they don't, then they're bad people. So I will say that Anger is a Gift, in Each of Us a Desert, you're going to see a character. I just wanted to write someone who is selfish, and writing their magic and seeing their magic as a completely selfish thing. I mean, if you're not sure, it's like the first page just says, Each of Us a Desert has a very difficult framing device. The entire book is one prayer that the main character says to their God. So it's in first and second person, which has already like made people angry. Like someone was like, "Why did you do that?" And I'm like, "Because I wanted to." Sorry. I don't know. Sorry, Comic-Con. I don't know if we can swear. But anyway, I say like on the first page, she says something to the effect of like, "This is what I did, and I'm not sorry for it." And I wanted to set that tone right at the beginning, which is, I made choices. Some of them are real bad. Some of them are messy. Because she's a very messy character. She's not Moss in any way at all. But I wanted to write about how this young girl realizes that she's been mistreated, sometimes by the most benevolent, well-intentioned people, including her parents who love her and support her, and they're actually very nice people, but no one thought, hey, what is it like for a 16-year-old girl to have to listen to all these traumatic things that all these people are saying, and everyone tells her she can't leave because she's going to save them? And what pressure do we put on people to say you're going to save our entire world? And her journey is, what do I want? What's my life? What choices do I get to make? So I remember getting the email about this panel, and I was just like, oh, Own Your Magic, that's literally the theme of my book. Like, she knows she has this ability. What does she choose to do with it?
Sarah, anything you add to that?
I have to follow all of you guys. So the world that I have set up is an extreme patriarchy. So I have this princess, her father dies. She can't actually access her own, her own power because she has to marry for it. So princesses in my world, if you're the sole heir, you have to marry to become queen. And she's like, I'm 16. My dad just died. I'm probably in love with my best friend. I don't want to get married. Why can't we change this law? And because of the way the power structure is, the other kingdoms, so this union, they have the choice to change the law or not. And so then that makes her think, well, my dad knew he wasn't going to have another heir. Her mother ran away. She's literally called the runaway queen. Like, why? He had 16 years, actually 15, because that's when her mother ran away. Like, why didn't he change it? And so then she has all of these questions. And if the person at the very top of your kingdom, the place that you're living, can't actually control their own life, and these other, the royal council is trying to marry her off, and she can't make her own decisions, like, where are we? And so it's sort of my take on feminism, right? Like, on women in power. We're not given power. This is an extreme patriarchy. All the men have power. They're trying to kill off their wives so they can marry her and gain a kingdom. And that's terrible. Like, and I just wanted to explore that. I like to put female characters in male-dominated spaces and let them do well. Like, have them be powerful in some way. And, they do have to deal with a lot. But I think that that's important. I didn't see those stories as a kid. I didn't see that in Buttercup, right? Like, I didn't see that in all the damsel stories that I read. Girls were things to be captured, to be gained. They were just fodder. And I didn't like that in my stories. And I'm still, as an adult, trying to realize my own power as an adult. Like, I don't like confrontation as a person. I love it on the page. I think that's really important to explore through our writing, right? Like, I have power, you have power, we all have power, and trying to get it out on the page and figuring out why I want to talk about it, So that wasn't as good as any of your answers, but that's my answer.
It was very good.
It was awesome. Thank you. So I think we got time for maybe one more question. And, I'd really love to know, what books about magic, what fantasy books did you love growing up? And how did those books kind of come out in what you're writing now? How are those books that you loved growing up, how are they reflected? How do they come out? How do you pay homage to them? And I don't know, TJ, why don't you start us off?
Oh boy. I read a bunch of, I guess I was a weird kid, and that will probably come out in just a second when I say that my idea of good reading when I was 10, 11, 12 years old was Stephen King. I read a lot of Stephen King, and it was something that I had to hide under my bed because my parents would not want me reading Stephen King. But there was, he wrote one particular book. It was called The Eyes of the Dragon. And in that book, it is on its surface, it's a very stereotypical, oh, here's an evil, there's chosen ones, and then there's quests that we have to go on. But it is extraordinarily dark. It is a very, very dark book. I mean, come on, it's Stephen King. And that really positioned how I saw fantasy growing up. I thought that good fantasy needed to be dark and heavy and filled with all these morals, and people suffered to get what they wanted. And at the very end, maybe they were kind of happy, but maybe they probably weren't. And that's not how it has to be. That is not how it has to be. You can have fantasy. You can have, by the way, I'm sorry, I keep getting distracted by how gorgeous our covers are behind you. It's just, we have very lovely covers. But fantasy, especially what I'm trying to do, and I won't speak for anybody else here, but fantasy doesn't have to be heavy or sad or upsetting at all the time. It can be angry, and there's a difference between being angry and being upsetting. But it can also be funny. It can be soothing. It could be gentle, and it could be happy. And that's what I wanted to try to do with how I try to write, is because to me, there's so much heaviness. I mean, look, it's June 2020 when we're recording this. Look how the world is right now. Everything outside is on fire, and for good reason. But I want to be able to at least give a bit of an escape, because that's what I loved about when I got to find happy fantasy, is that it doesn't always need to be sad or dark. It can be happy too, and maybe it can be a little bit hopeful. And that's what I hope people get from what I do, and that's what I hope people like to read too.
Let's go next. Mark?
Oh man, I was hoping I'd go last because I've been sitting here struggling because
it's hard to think of a book, right?
Well, I traditionally didn't actually read fantasy as a kid. Like the few fantasy things that I'm thinking of were always on the peripheral. I definitely read lots of Stephen King. It was my first adult novel that I ever read. I was 8. That was a mistake. That explains so much about me, by the way. I feel like it does. I read a lot of Gothic fiction. I read like Edgar Allan Poe. I read things where there are fantastical elements, but like pure fantasy, I read very, very little of it. Unfortunately, it was because the fantasy kids in junior high and high school were those sort of stereotypical white dudes who are so condescending that you don't already know everything about the genre, that even when you're asking them for recommendations, they're like, you haven't read The Silmarillion? And I'm like, no, because knowledge doesn't work that way. You have to read something to know about it. So no, I haven't read it. So how am I supposed to know about all this stuff? Like, so I didn't really super get into fantasy until I was an adult through my Mark Reed's project, where I went back and read like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and I got to experience Tamara Pierce for the first time, and getting to read Diane Duane, and getting to read stuff that people read as a kid. So I think that speculative fiction, fantastical, weird stuff that I read as a kid, all that absolutely influenced me. Like, I don't think I'd be who I am if I wasn't super into like, Edgar Allan Poe's short stories. I actually think television influenced me more because I grew up watching The Twilight Zone and The X-Files. And that's like my everything, like weird stuff. And the government is terrible to you. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm super into this. So yeah, my relationship with fantasy is more as an adult, not so much as a kid.
Cool.
I'll go after that because I'm very similar, Mark. I grew up on Star Trek, like watched the 60s Star Trek with my dad. They were into the New Generation. I mean, so I got most of my fantasy or sci-fi in general just from movies, right? Mm-hmm. I have a background as a journalist, and so I actually think that affects my writing more than anything that I've read. Like, I was a sports journalist, and I was, blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl from Kansas who's about 5 feet tall, and so anytime I walked into a locker room, people were like on me because I didn't think I knew what I was talking about, or just, in general. And so obviously that informs my writing quite a bit. But as an adult, like, I've come to love fantasy, or just like find books that I wouldn't have read as a kid, I actually think the books that affect me the most are, I really love mysteries, and I spent an entire summer reading all of the Jack Reacher novels in order. And I feel like even though my books aren't like that at all, somebody dies in the first chapter of The Princess Will Save You. So like, maybe that affected me more than fantasy. I think fantasy for me is more of an escape rather than something that I actually actively try to learn from. I don't know. Like, I think that the way you engage with it is different depending on whatever you came across as a kid. But like, I read a lot more contemporary as a kid, or just like whatever I was supposed to read in class. I think like the most fantastical thing I read in high school was Metamorphosis, and I hated it. Guy wakes up as a cockroach, and it's terrible. But like, because I was too busy reading, you know, I was a kid that was involved in all these things, and it wasn't until I got out of college that I could read for fun again. You know, like I had this period where I didn't get a chance to read a whole bunch, and so I was seeing things in movies, and that was pretty much it.
Cool. And Bethany. Hi.
Yes. Okay. So I too consumed a lot more fantasy in terms of visual media than I read, but I will say, okay, again, I think this is very specific to being a Black American girl. I think of speculative literary fiction as sort of my reality. So reading Beloved as a teenager was like, this is a truer expression of the world than all of this other supposedly contemporary fiction, for the reasons that I already stated. So I will say that in school, I was in a lot of programs that were very reading and writing intensive, and we did a lot of reading and writing, and we did a lot of creation myths, we did a lot of Gilgamesh, we did a lot of epic poems and stuff like that. And I, for one, still to this day don't read high fantasy. I'm completely disinterested in it. I remembered the book. If you were like, okay, what book did you fake reading? As somebody who loves reading and who loved all of the things we had to do, The Once and Future King. Like, we get to this and I'm like, I don't care. I do not care. This is the most boring thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, I legit could not care less. This is the most, I mean, to me, it felt like a for white guys. I'm just saying, like, it was so, I'm sorry. I don't know if we're able.
You're not sorry. Do not be sorry for that.
Do not apologize for that.
You knew what kind of sorry that was,
tremendous.
Mark. You knew what kind of sorry that was. No, but so like that, to me, that is quote unquote sword fantasy, epic fantasy. And I'm like, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So finding something like Beloved, or reading Like Water for Chocolate, or reading The House of Spirits or something was like, this is real. That's what was so beautiful about it to me. This is real. Like, this is actual life. This is like what the real world actually is like to me. So I realized that stuff I wouldn't find in like a fantasy or science fiction section. I would find it either in the bookstore ghetto of like Black American fiction, or, you know, Latin American, whatever they called it at the time, fiction. But they would be in these sort of like bookstore ghettos, and they wouldn't be with the other stuff anyway. So it was very, I mean, you just get that message constantly, incessantly, that you're not part of reality. And you're like, but this is the only thing that actually feels real. Like, the stuff that you guys are talking about is like, come on. So I'm trying to think of any other book before Beloved where I genuinely, like, I read a lot of science fiction, and like science fiction to me is totally different. And science fiction is really like my heart. So like, I read a lot of short stories and Asimov and all that kind of stuff. And for the most part, I always really enjoyed that stuff. But I think of fantasy as it's been sort of force fed to us as just being more of the programming that I reject.
I think if I can just add on, I think it's interesting too, Bethany, how these things are presented to us, especially in a school setting. And I think about, you know, like,
why did we need to read that in school, y'all? The Once and Future King? Come on. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So the example I was going to read, it's not fantasy, but like, why did I have to read a separate piece in high school? Like,
why did I have to read Wuthering Heights?
A separate piece. John Knowles is the most mediocre writer, period. And I want to say that publicly. The second thing I want to say, I'm sorry, is that George Orwell is a plagiarist. Go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. Oh boy.
Listen.
Let's handle into something else.
I'm just, I felt like it was a truth-telling moment, and I just wanted to.
It's a truth-telling moment. Because, like, let's be real, like, a separate piece would have been improved by a white guy. But it was, you know, sorry, I don't care. But I think about how that book is presented to us as this masterpiece of literature, and it remains the only time I've ever gotten an F on an essay in English in all of junior high and high school.
Oh, I tore that apart. My teacher was there for it, thank God.
Mine wasn't. You know what mine said? Our assignment was what are the universal themes and the relatability of a separate piece, and I wrote an entire essay saying none of it.
Where?
Because
where's the universal?
I am from, like, you're teaching this book to a group of almost entirely brown and black kids. We can't relate to this. Also, I've never murdered my best friend. Like, I can't relate to that. I just can't relate to that.
And then know that you're going to go on to like a totally normal Brett Kavanaugh future. Like that's like, I'm just saying that's fantasy. That's fantasy to me. Like that whole thing was like, yeah, this is fantasy, guys. This is not reality.
I think that's what made it really hard for me for so long. And I am glad I got into fantasy as an adult, because then I had access to more resources and access to more people who could say, yo, there's actually some really amazing things that are happening.
You don't have to read Tolkien.
Go read. You can go read Sophia Samatar and have your whole life just ruined by her.
I love Sophia Samatar.
Anyway, so you know.
There you go. You put us on the same panel. This was I blame Tor.
This was amazing. This was a wonderful end to the panel. Unfortunately, we are way over our time. We're out of time now, but thank you for joining us for Tor Teen's Own Your Magic. This has been Bethany C. Morrow, TJ Klune, Sarah Henning, and Mark Oshiro. Buy their books. They're amazing. Thank you. Goodbye.